The fluorescent lights hummed overhead in the Naval Maintenance Facility as Sarah Chen adjusted her coveralls and checked her toolbox one final time. At 28 years old, she had the kind of quiet confidence that came from knowing your way around every bolt, wire, and hydraulic system on a naval vessel. Her maintenance badge gleamed under the harsh lighting, a simple piece of metal that, to most people, represented nothing more than technical competence and the ability to fix what was broken. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. What they didn't know, what nobody at Naval Station Norfolk knew, was that beneath that maintenance badge lay another piece of metal. Hidden from view, pressed against her chest, was a SEAL Trident. The golden eagle, anchor, pistol, and Neptune's trident that represented one of the most elite fighting forces in the world. Sarah had earned that trident through months of grueling training that broke most men. Through Hell Week, where she'd carried boat after boat after boat on her shoulders until her body screamed for mercy. Through dive operations in freezing water that tested every fiber of her being. But today, she was just Sarah the mechanic. The woman who fixed engines and troubleshot electrical systems. The one who showed up early, stayed late, and never complained about the grease under her fingernails, or the ache in her back from crawling through tight spaces in ship hulls. The morning started like any other. Sarah arrived at the maintenance bay before sunrise, her breath visible in the cool Virginia air. She preferred these quiet hours before the chaos began, when she could organize her thoughts and prepare for whatever challenges the day might bring. The USS Fitzgerald was scheduled for routine maintenance, and Sarah had been assigned to lead the engine room inspection team. As she reviewed the maintenance checklist, her fingers unconsciously traced the outline of the hidden trident beneath her uniform. It was a habit she'd developed over the past 6 months since taking this assignment. The weight of it reminded her of who she really was, even when everyone around her saw only the surface. The first sign of trouble came when Petty Officer Rodriguez walked into the bay with his usual swagger. Rodriguez was the kind of sailor who thought volume made up for competence, and he'd made it clear from day one that he didn't think much of having a woman lead his maintenance team. "Morning, Wrench Turner," Rodriguez called out, his voice carrying the particular brand of condescension that Sarah had learned to ignore. "Hope you're ready for some real work today. The Fitzgerald's got some issues that might be too complicated for someone who learned everything from a manual." Sarah didn't look up from her checklist. She'd heard variations of this speech dozens of times over the past months. Rodriguez and his buddies seemed to think that questioning her competence was some kind of sport. They'd make jokes about her playing mechanic, and whisper about how she'd probably gotten her position through some kind of diversity program rather than actual skill. "Good morning, Rodriguez," she replied evenly, her voice carrying the kind of calm authority that came from years of training in environments where hesitation could mean death. "The inspection schedule is posted on the board. We'll be starting with the engine room at 0800 hours. Rodriguez laughed, nudging his friend, Petty Officer Williams. "Listen to her, talking all official. You know what your problem is, Chen? You take yourself too seriously. This is just maintenance work, not some kind of military operation." If only he knew, Sarah thought. If only any of them knew what kind of military operations she'd actually been part of. The missions she couldn't talk about, the places she'd been that didn't exist on any official map, the moments when split-second decisions had meant the difference between success and catastrophe. But Sarah had learned patience in a school that most people couldn't imagine. She'd learned to control her breathing during underwater demolitions, to move silently through enemy territory, to maintain perfect discipline even when chaos erupted around her. Dealing with Rodriguez's petty harassment was nothing compared to what she'd endured to earn her trident. The morning progressed with the usual rhythm of maintenance work. Sarah moved through the ship's systems with the kind of methodical precision that impressed even her critics. She could diagnose problems by sound, identify potential failures by touch, and solve complex mechanical puzzles that left more experienced technicians scratching their heads. But for every moment of professional competence, there was another snide comment, another dismissive gesture, another reminder that her colleagues saw her as an outsider who didn't belong in their world. They didn't see the hours she'd spent memorizing technical manuals, the nights she'd worked on her own time to master systems that others took for granted. What they definitely didn't see was the way she moved through the ship's corridors with the silent efficiency of someone trained in close-quarters combat, or how her eyes constantly scanned for exits and potential threats, even in the safest environment. They didn't notice that she could disassemble and reassemble complex machinery with the same steady hands that had once prepared explosive charges under fire. By midday, the maintenance team had made significant progress on the Fitzgerald systems. Sarah's leadership was paying off, despite the constant undercurrent of resentment from some of her team members. They were ahead of schedule and under budget, exactly the kind of performance that had earned her recognition from her superiors. But recognition from superiors wasn't the same as respect from peers. And Sarah felt the familiar weight of isolation that came with carrying secrets that no one around her could understand. The afternoon brought a change in the ship's atmosphere that Sarah noticed immediately. There was a tension in the air, the kind that came when word traveled through the naval grapevine that something important was about to happen. Sailors moved with more purpose, conversations were conducted in hushed tones, and there was an electric anticipation that experienced military personnel recognized instantly. Sarah was deep in the engine room, troubleshooting a stubborn hydraulic system when she heard the announcement over the ship's intercom. All hands, all hands. Admiral Harrison will be conducting an inspection of maintenance operations at 1500 hours. All department heads report to the bridge immediately. Admiral Harrison. Sarah's breath caught slightly as she processed the name. She knew that name, though she'd never served under him directly. Harrison was a legend in the special operations community, a man who'd risen through the ranks during some of the Navy's most challenging decades. He was known for his sharp mind, his intolerance for bureaucratic nonsense, and his ability to see through facades that fooled everyone else. More importantly, Admiral Harrison was one of the few high-ranking officers who knew about certain classified operations that had taken place over the past several years. Operations that Sarah had been part of, missions that existed only in files so classified that most admirals would never see them. "Did you hear that, Chun?" Rodriguez's voice carried a note of barely contained excitement. "A real admiral's coming to see how we work. Hope you're ready to show him what real Navy maintenance looks like." Sarah continued working on the hydraulic system, but her mind was racing. She'd been assigned to this maintenance posting as part of a carefully orchestrated cover, a way to maintain her skills and stay active in the Navy while recovering from injuries sustained during her last classified mission. The idea was that she could blend in, do good work, and prepare for her next assignment without drawing attention to her true background. But Admiral Harrison's presence changed everything. If he was conducting a routine inspection, it was possible he'd pass through without recognizing her. But if he was here for reasons related to her classified work, if someone had connected her current assignment to her previous operations, then her carefully maintained cover might be about to crumble. The next hour passed in a blur of frantic preparation. The entire maintenance crew worked to ensure that every system was operating perfectly, every tool was in its proper place, and every surface was clean enough to satisfy an admiral's inspection. Sarah found herself caught between two worlds, the world of routine maintenance work, where she was just another technician, and the world of classified operations, where she was something else entirely. Rodriguez took particular pleasure in assigning Sarah the most visible tasks, clearly hoping that any mistakes she made would be noticed by the visiting admiral. "Chun, "I want you front and center when the Admiral gets here," he announced with a grin. "Show him what our maintenance team is really made of." Sarah nodded calmly, but inside she was calculating possibilities. There was a chance that Admiral Harrison wouldn't recognize her. After all, she'd been operating under different circumstances during their previous indirect contact. But there was also a chance that he would, and that recognition could have consequences she wasn't prepared for. At 14:55 hours, the word came down that the Admiral's party was approaching the maintenance bay. Sarah took her position at the hydraulic system she'd been working on, her hands steady despite the adrenaline beginning to course through her veins. Around her, the maintenance crew straightened their uniforms and tried to look like the kind of sailors who impressed flag officers. The first sign of the Admiral's arrival was the sound of footsteps in the corridor, not the casual shuffle of enlisted personnel, but the crisp, purposeful stride of officers who expected the world to move out of their way. Sarah kept her eyes focused on her work, but her peripheral vision tracked the movement of the inspection party as they entered the maintenance bay. Admiral Harrison was exactly as Sarah had imagined him: tall, silver-haired, with the kind of presence that commanded attention without demanding it. He moved through the maintenance bay with the confidence of someone who'd spent decades in environments where decisiveness meant survival. Behind him came a small entourage of staff officers and the ship's senior leadership. Petty Officer Rodriguez, the ship's engineering officer, called out, "Present your maintenance team to the Admiral." Rodriguez stepped forward with obvious pride, his chest puffed out as he prepared to showcase his department. "Admiral, it's an honor to have you visit our maintenance facility. Our team has been working around the clock to ensure that every system on the Fitzgerald meets the highest Navy standards." Admiral Harrison nodded politely, his eyes already scanning the workspace with the practiced efficiency of someone who could assess competence at a glance. Sarah continued working, hoping to remain invisible while the Admiral conducted his inspection. But as the inspection party moved through the maintenance bay, Sarah became aware that the Admiral's attention was gradually focusing in her direction. She could feel his gaze lingering on her workstation, and when she finally looked up, she found herself making direct eye contact with one of the most powerful men in the Navy. For a moment, neither of them moved. Admiral Harrison's expression was unreadable, but Sarah caught something in his eyes, a flicker of recognition, perhaps, or maybe just the sharp attention of an officer who'd noticed something that others had missed. "And what system are you working on, sailor?" Admiral Harrison asked, his voice carrying the kind of authority that made everyone in the room straighten their posture. Sarah stood and came to attention, her movements precise and military despite the grease-stained coveralls. "Hydraulic system. Maintenance, sir. We've been troubleshooting pressure irregularities in the steering mechanism." The tension in the maintenance bay was palpable as Admiral Harrison's inspection continued, but Sarah could sense that something had shifted in the way he was observing her work. What had started as routine questioning was evolving into something more focused, more personal. Admiral Harrison stepped closer to Sarah's workstation, his experienced eyes taking in not just the technical work she'd been performing, but the way she carried herself, the precision of her movements, and the quiet confidence that seemed to radiate from her even in this moment of formal inspection. "Interesting approach to the hydraulic problem," he said, leaning in to examine her work. "Most technicians would have started with the primary pressure valve, but you've gone straight to the secondary regulator. That suggests you understand the system at a level that goes beyond basic maintenance protocols." Sarah felt a bead of sweat form at the base of her neck. Admiral Harrison's comment wasn't just about her technical skills, it was the kind of observation that someone made when they recognized expertise that went beyond what was visible on the surface. "Sir, the symptoms suggested a pressure differential that would typically originate in the secondary system rather than the primary," she replied, keeping her voice steady and professional. The primary systems were showing normal readings, but the response time indicated a problem deeper in the control matrix. Rodriguez, who had been beaming with pride at the Admiral's attention to his department, now looked puzzled. The level of technical discussion happening between his junior technician and the Admiral was beyond anything he'd expected. Moreover, Sarah was demonstrating a depth of knowledge that he'd never seen her display before. Admiral Harrison straightened up, his gaze never leaving Sarah's face. There was something in his expression now, a sharpening of attention that made everyone in the immediate vicinity unconsciously hold their breath. That's the kind of systems thinking that I associate with people who've had advanced training. The Admiral said carefully, "Tell me, Petty Officer Chen, what's your background before this assignment?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah was aware that everyone in the maintenance bay was listening now, that this conversation had become the center of attention for the entire inspection. Rodriguez was frowning, clearly confused by the Admiral's intense interest in someone he'd dismissed as just another wrench-turner. "I completed basic technical training at Great Lakes, sir, followed by advanced systems training at Norfolk," Sarah replied, sticking to the official record that anyone could access. "I've been working in maintenance for about 6 months now." But Admiral Harrison wasn't satisfied with the standard response. He moved closer, and Sarah caught the slight narrowing of his eyes that told her he was looking for something specific. His voice dropped slightly, not enough for the others to notice, but enough for Sarah to understand that this was no longer a routine inspection question. 6 months, he repeated thoughtfully, "and before that?" "I have the feeling that someone with your level of competence didn't just appear in the Navy maintenance system without some kind of distinguished prior service." Sarah's hand moved unconsciously toward her chest, where the hidden SEAL Trident lay beneath her maintenance badge. It was a tiny gesture, barely noticeable, but Admiral Harrison caught it immediately. His eyes followed the movement, and for a moment, his expression changed completely. The Admiral's eyes widened slightly, and Sarah saw the exact moment when recognition dawned. It wasn't just recognition of her face or her name, it was recognition of what she represented, of the classification level she carried, of the operations she'd been part of that existed in files so secret that only a handful of people in the entire Navy knew about them. "Petty Officer Chen," Admiral Harrison said, his voice taking on a completely different tone, "could you step over here for a moment? I'd like to discuss your work in private." Rodriguez stepped forward, confused and slightly annoyed. "Sir, if there's an issue with Chun's work, I can address it. She's part of my team, and I'm responsible for—" "Petty Officer Rodriguez," Admiral Harrison interrupted, his voice carrying the kind of authority that ended discussions immediately. "I need to speak with Petty Officer Chen privately. Please continue with your duties." Sarah followed the Admiral to a quiet corner of the maintenance bay, her heart racing but her expression carefully neutral. She was aware that every eye in the room was following them, that this conversation would be analyzed and discussed for weeks to come. "Show me," Admiral Harrison said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah knew exactly what he meant. With movements that were careful and deliberate, she unbuttoned the top of her coveralls and pulled aside her undershirt, revealing the SEAL Trident that had been hidden beneath her maintenance badge. The Golden Eagle, anchor, pistol, and Neptune's trident caught the light for just a moment before she covered it again. Admiral Harrison's expression changed completely. The polite interest of a routine inspection was replaced by something much more complex: respect, understanding, and perhaps a touch of anger at the treatment he'd just witnessed. "Operation Neptune's Garden," he said, so quietly that only she could hear. "You were part of the team that extracted the intelligence from the underwater facility off the coast of—" "Yes, sir," Sarah interrupted gently. "Though I believe the details of that operation are still classified." Admiral Harrison nodded slowly, his mind clearly working through the implications of what he'd just discovered. Here was a decorated special operations veteran, someone who'd risked her life in missions that most people would never even know had happened, being treated as just another maintenance worker by people who had no idea of her true capabilities. How long have you been enduring this? He asked, gesturing subtly toward the maintenance crew, who were still watching their conversation with obvious curiosity. It's not about enduring, sir, Sarah replied. It's about the mission. I was assigned here for specific reasons, and I've been focused on completing that assignment successfully. But Admiral Harrison was already shaking his head. The mission doesn't require you to be disrespected or undervalued. And what I just witnessed ... He paused, looking back toward Rodriguez, who was pretending to work while obviously straining to overhear their conversation. What I just witnessed was unacceptable. The moment of recognition hung between them like a classified document that had suddenly been declassified. Admiral Harrison's expression had completely transformed from the polite interest of a routine inspection to something far more complex, a mixture of understanding, respect, and barely contained anger at what he had witnessed. Admiral Harrison's face had transformed from polite inspection interest to something far more serious. The weight of recognition settled between them like a classified document that had suddenly been declassified. Sarah could see him processing not just who she was, but what her presence in this maintenance bay really meant. Petty Officer Chen, he said, his voice carrying the kind of gravity reserved for matters of national security. I need you to understand something. What I'm seeing here isn't just inappropriate, it's a complete failure of leadership at multiple levels. Sarah maintained her professional composure, but inside she was calculating the implications of this moment. Her cover assignment was about to be blown, and she wasn't sure what that meant for her future operations or her current mission parameters. The Admiral glanced around the maintenance bay, taking in the scene with new eyes. Rodriguez was still pretending to work while obviously straining to overhear their conversation. Other members of the maintenance crew were exchanging glances and whispered comments about the unexpected private conversation between their junior technician and the visiting admiral. Sir, Sarah said carefully, I want to emphasize that my current assignment parameters were designed to maintain operational security. The treatment I've received here, while not ideal, hasn't interfered with my ability to complete my assigned tasks. Admiral Harrison's expression hardened. Operational security is one thing, Petty Officer Chen, but allowing decorated special operations personnel to be subjected to harassment and disrespect is another matter entirely. What I witnessed before our conversation was unacceptable, regardless of cover requirements. He paused, studying her face intently. Tell me about Operation Neptune's garden. Not the classified details, but what happened to you afterward. How did you end up here? Sarah took a deep breath, organizing her thoughts. This was the first time in 6 months that she'd been able to speak openly about her background, even in limited terms, and she found herself struggling with how much to reveal. The operation was successful, sir, but I sustained injuries that required extended recovery time. During that period, it was determined that I could best serve by taking a maintenance assignment that would allow me to maintain my technical skills while preparing for future operations. Injuries, Admiral Harrison repeated, his voice taking on a different tone. Combat injuries? Yes, sir. During the underwater extraction phase, there was unexpected resistance. I was able to complete the mission, but the medical team recommended a period of lower intensity duty to ensure full recovery. Admiral Harrison nodded slowly, and Sarah could see him connecting pieces of information that painted a picture of sacrifice and dedication that no one in this maintenance bay had ever imagined. And during this recovery period, while you've been serving your country in a different capacity, you've been subjected to harassment based on assumptions about your competence and qualifications. It wasn't really a question, but Sarah nodded. Anyway, the harassment has been manageable, sir. I've dealt with worse situations. I'm sure you have, Admiral Harrison replied grimly, but that's not the point. The point is that it shouldn't be happening at all. The Admiral looked back toward the maintenance crew, who were still watching their conversation with obvious curiosity. Rodriguez had given up any pretense of working and was openly staring in their direction, his expression a mixture of confusion and growing concern. "Petty Officer Chen, I want you to know that your service record speaks for itself. The missions you've been part of, the risks you've taken, the intelligence you've helped gather, it's made a difference at the highest levels of national security. You've earned respect that goes far beyond what anyone in this room understands." Sarah felt a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the hot maintenance bay. For 6 months, she'd been carrying the weight of her achievements. In silence, unable to share or even acknowledge the things she'd accomplished. Hearing Admiral Harrison recognize her service felt like validation she hadn't realized she desperately needed. "However," the Admiral continued, "I also understand that your current assignment serves important purposes beyond just recovery time. The technical skills you're developing here, the ability to blend in with regular Navy personnel, the experience of working in different environments, these are all valuable for future operations." He paused, considering his next words carefully. "But that doesn't mean you should have to endure disrespect or harassment. There are ways to maintain your cover while ensuring that you're treated with appropriate professional courtesy." Sarah could see where this conversation was heading, and she felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. Relief because the isolation and constant low-level harassment had been more wearing than she'd wanted to admit. Apprehension because any change in her situation could affect her readiness for future missions. "What are you suggesting, sir?" "Admiral." Harrison's expression became more businesslike, the look of a senior officer who'd made a decision and was now moving to implement it. "I'm suggesting that it's time for some people in this maintenance bay to understand that competence and dedication come in many forms, and that making assumptions about someone's background based on their current assignment is a mistake that can have serious consequences. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story." The Admiral straightened up, his voice returning to its normal command tone. "Petty Officer Rodriguez." Rodriguez practically jumped at the sound of his name being called by the Admiral. He hurried over, his expression anxious and confused. "Yes, sir. I understand you're the senior petty officer in this maintenance section," Admiral Harrison said, his tone deceptively calm. "Yes, sir. I've been leading this team for the past 8 months, and I'm proud to say that we've maintained excellent standards of—" "Tell me about Petty Officer Chen," Admiral Harrison interrupted. "What's your assessment of her performance and capabilities?" Rodriguez glanced nervously at Sarah, then back at the Admiral. "Well, sir, Chen is she's adequate. She follows orders and completes her assigned tasks. She's been with us for about 6 months now, and she's learned the basic systems pretty well." "Adequate," Admiral Harrison repeated, his voice carrying a dangerous edge that made Rodriguez shift uncomfortably. "And how would you characterize the working relationship between Petty Officer Chen and the rest of your team?" Rodriguez's discomfort was becoming more obvious by the moment. "Sir, I believe in maintaining high standards and pushing everyone to excel. Sometimes that means providing direct feedback about performance and attitude. The Navy doesn't have room for people who can't handle honest criticism." Sarah watched this exchange with growing fascination. Rodriguez was digging himself deeper with every word, apparently unaware that he was describing harassment and unprofessional behavior to an admiral who now understood exactly who Sarah was and what she'd accomplished. "I see," Admiral Harrison said quietly. "And this direct feedback you mentioned, can you give me some examples of how you've helped Petty Officer Chen improve her performance?" The question hung in the air like a trap waiting to be sprung. Rodriguez looked around nervously, suddenly realizing that this conversation wasn't going in the direction he'd expected. The revelation of Sarah's true identity had created a new dynamic in the maintenance bay, and Admiral Harrison was clearly preparing to address the fundamental leadership failures he had witnessed. The quiet conversation that had revealed her SEAL background was about to become something much more public and consequential. Rodriguez's face had gone pale as he realized that Admiral Harrison's questions weren't the routine inquiries he'd expected. The Admiral's tone had shifted from polite interest to something much more serious, and Rodriguez was beginning to understand that he might be in serious trouble. "Sir," Rodriguez began, his voice lacking its usual confidence, "I believe in maintaining discipline and ensuring that everyone on my team understands their role. Sometimes that requires firm leadership." "Firm leadership," Admiral Harrison repeated slowly. "I'm asking for specific examples, Petty Officer Rodriguez. How exactly have you demonstrated this firm leadership with Petty Officer Chen?" Sarah watched Rodriguez struggle with the question, seeing him realize that his casual harassment and dismissive attitude toward her suddenly sounded very different when he had to explain it to a flag officer. The jokes that had seemed harmless to him, the constant undermining of her competence, the suggestions that she didn't belong in the Navy, all of it was about to be exposed under the harsh light of official scrutiny. "Well, sir, I've made sure that Chen understands the importance of following proper procedures and not getting ahead of herself. Sometimes new people, especially, sometimes they need to understand that this is serious work that requires experience and proven competence." Admiral Harrison's expression was becoming increasingly dangerous. "Especially what, Petty Officer Rodriguez?" "Sir, I just meant that maintenance work requires a certain kind of experience, and not everyone is naturally suited for it. I've been trying to help Chen understand where she fits in the team structure." Sarah could see other members of the maintenance crew beginning to gather around, drawn by the obvious tension in the conversation. Williams, Rodriguez's frequent companion in the harassment, was watching with growing alarm as he recognized that their treatment of Sarah was suddenly under official scrutiny. "And how exactly have you been helping her understand where she fits?" Admiral Harrison's voice was now carrying the kind of authority that made everyone in the immediate area stand at attention. Rodriguez was clearly struggling, caught between his desire to defend his behavior and his growing realization that he was in serious trouble. "Sir, I've provided guidance about Navy standards and the importance of proving yourself through hard work rather than expecting special treatment." "Special treatment," Admiral Harrison repeated, his voice now carrying an edge that made Rodriguez take a step backward. "Tell me, Petty Officer Rodriguez, what special treatment has Petty Officer Chen been requesting?" "Well, sir, not requesting exactly, but sometimes people expect to be treated differently based on factors other than their actual performance." Admiral Harrison took a step closer to Rodriguez, his presence suddenly filling the space between them. "What factors, Petty Officer Rodriguez?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Rodriguez looked desperately around the maintenance bay, suddenly realizing that he was being forced to articulate attitudes and assumptions that sounded much worse when spoken aloud to a flag officer. "Sir, I was just ensuring that everyone on my team earns their place through demonstrated competence, rather than any other considerations." "Any other considerations," Admiral Harrison said, his voice now carrying the kind of quiet fury that experienced military personnel recognized as far more dangerous than shouting. "Are you suggesting that Petty Officer Chen's assignment to your team was based on something other than her qualifications?" Rodriguez was now visibly sweating, trapped by his own words and the Admiral's relentless questioning. "No, sir, I just meant that it's important to maintain high standards and not make assumptions about people's capabilities based on their background or training." Sarah almost smiled at the irony. Rodriguez was talking about not making assumptions while having spent 6 months making exactly those assumptions about her, treating her as incompetent based on nothing more than his prejudices about women, inculpating her as incompetent, as incompetent, prejudices about women. "Maintenance roles," Admiral Harrison turned slightly to address A growing crowd of maintenance personnel who had gathered to witness this exchange. I want everyone to understand something very clearly. The United States Navy assigns personnel to positions based on their qualifications, their skills, and their ability to contribute to the mission. Any suggestion that someone's assignment is based on factors other than merit is not only incorrect, but potentially harmful to unit cohesion and effectiveness. He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. Moreover, any behavior that undermines a sailor's ability to perform their duties effectively, whether through harassment, assumptions about their competence, or failure to recognize their contributions, is unacceptable and will not be tolerated. The maintenance bay had gone completely silent except for the hum of machinery and the distant sound of ship operations. Every person present understood that they were witnessing something significant, though most of them still didn't fully grasp what was happening. Admiral Harrison turned back to Rodriguez, his expression now showing the kind of controlled anger that came from a career spent dealing with failures of leadership. Petty Officer Rodriguez, I'm going to ask you one more time, and I want you to think very carefully about your answer. How would you characterize your treatment of Petty Officer Chen during her time under your supervision? Rodriguez looked around desperately, as if searching for help that wasn't coming. Williams had quietly moved toward the back of the crowd, obviously hoping to avoid being drawn into the conversation. Other team members were studying the floor, or suddenly finding urgent tasks that required their immediate attention. "Sir," Rodriguez said finally, his voice barely above a whisper, "I've tried to maintain appropriate standards and ensure that everyone on my team understands their responsibilities." "That's not what I asked," Admiral Harrison replied coldly. "I asked how you've treated Petty Officer Chen. Have you treated her with the respect and professional courtesy that every sailor deserves?" The question hung in the air like a sword waiting to fall. Rodriguez's face went through a series of expressions as he realized that there was no good answer to the Admiral's question that wouldn't expose his behavior over the past 6 months. "Sir, I believe I've been fair and consistent in my leadership approach," he said finally, but his voice lacked conviction. Admiral Harrison nodded slowly, as if Rodriguez's non-answer had confirmed everything he needed to know. "I see. And this fair and consistent leadership approach, has it included comments about Petty Officer Chen's competence, suggestions that she doesn't belong in maintenance work, or implications that her assignment was based on factors other than her qualifications?" Admiral Harrison's systematic questioning had backed Rodriguez into a corner, and now the moment had arrived for the full truth to be revealed to everyone present. What had started as a private recognition between Sarah and the Admiral was about to become a public revelation that would change everything. The silence in the maintenance bay was deafening. Rodriguez's face had gone from pale to ashen as he realized that Admiral Harrison's questions were leading somewhere he couldn't escape. Every person in the room understood that they were witnessing a confrontation that would have lasting consequences, though most still didn't understand the full scope of what was happening. "Sir," Rodriguez said finally, his voice shaking slightly, "I may have occasionally provided feedback that could be interpreted as direct." Admiral Harrison's expression didn't change, but Sarah could see the controlled fury building behind his eyes. "Direct feedback. I want you to give me specific examples of this direct feedback, Petty Officer Rodriguez." Rodriguez looked around the maintenance bay like a trapped animal, suddenly aware that his months of casual harassment were about to be exposed under official scrutiny. "Sir, I might have occasionally mentioned that maintenance work requires proven experience and that not everyone is naturally suited for technical work." "Not everyone," Admiral Harrison repeated slowly. "Are you referring to women, Petty Officer Rodriguez?" The question cut through the air like a blade. Rodriguez's eyes widened as he realized that his carefully vague language wasn't going to protect him from the Admiral's direct approach. "No, sir, I didn't mean it that way. I just meant that some people need more time to prove themselves in technical positions." Admiral Harrison turned to address the entire maintenance crew, his voice carrying the kind of authority that made everyone stand straighter. I want everyone here to understand something very important. The United States Navy has spent decades learning that competence, dedication, and courage come in many forms. We have moved far beyond the outdated thinking that suggests certain roles are more suitable for certain types of people. He paused, his gaze sweeping across the assembled sailors. Any leader who fails to recognize the full potential of their team members, who makes assumptions based on gender, background, or any other factor unrelated to actual performance, is failing in their duty to the Navy and to their country. Sarah watched the faces around her, seeing the growing understanding that this wasn't just about her treatment, but about fundamental principles of military leadership and respect that affected everyone. Admiral Harrison turned back to Rodriguez, his expression now showing the kind of disappointed authority that was more devastating than anger. Petty Officer Rodriguez, I'm going to tell you something that might surprise you. During the past 6 months, while you've been questioning Petty Officer Chen's competence and suggesting that she doesn't belong in maintenance work, she has consistently demonstrated technical skills that exceed those of more senior personnel. Rodriguez looked confused and slightly defensive. Sir, I've been supervising her work, and while she's adequate, I wouldn't say she's exceptional. Adequate, Admiral Harrison repeated, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. Let me share some information that might help you understand the situation better. The hydraulic system problem that Petty Officer Chen diagnosed and repaired this morning? Your more experienced technicians had been working on that same system for 3 days without identifying the root cause. The maintenance crew exchanged glances, several of them nodding as they remembered the frustrating problem that had suddenly been resolved after Sarah took over the diagnostic work. Furthermore, Admiral Harrison continued, the electrical system. Modifications she suggested last month have improved efficiency by 12% and reduced maintenance requirements significantly. These improvements were noted by the ship's engineering staff and forwarded to Fleet Headquarters as potential standard modifications. Rodriguez's face was now showing a mixture of confusion and growing alarm. Sir, I wasn't aware that her work had received that level of attention. Of course you weren't, Admiral Harrison replied coldly, because you were too busy making assumptions about her capabilities to actually evaluate her performance objectively. The Admiral moved closer to Rodriguez, his presence suddenly filling the space between them. But here's what you really need to understand, Petty Officer Rodriguez. The woman you've been treating as incompetent, the sailor you've been harassing and dismissing, has a background that would make most people in this room feel humbled. Sarah felt her heart rate increase as she realized that Admiral Harrison was about to reveal at least part of her true background. She'd grown comfortable with her cover, with being underestimated and overlooked, but she also recognized that this moment was inevitable. Petty Officer Chen, Admiral Harrison announced to the entire maintenance crew, is not just another maintenance technician. She completed some of the most challenging training programs the Navy offers, and she has served in operations that most of you can't even imagine. The maintenance bay had gone completely silent except for the sound of machinery and distant ship operations. Every person present was now focused entirely on the Admiral's words, beginning to understand that everything they thought they knew about Sarah was about to change. The technical skills she's demonstrated here, the problem-solving abilities, the calm under pressure, these aren't accidents or lucky breaks. They're the result of training and experience that few people in the Navy will ever have the opportunity to acquire. Admiral Harrison paused, letting his words sink in before delivering the information that would change everything. Petty Officer Chen is a graduate of basic underwater demolition SEAL training. She has served in special operations that I cannot discuss in detail, but which have contributed significantly to national security objectives. The revelation hit the maintenance crew like a physical blow. Rodriguez's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, Disbelief, and finally, dawning horror as he realized the full scope of his mistake. "A SEAL," Williams whispered from the back of the crowd, his voice carrying the kind of awe that most Navy personnel felt when confronted with the elite warrior culture that SEALs represented. "That's correct," Admiral Harrison confirmed. "While you've been questioning her competence and suggesting that she doesn't belong in the Navy, Petty Officer Chen has been carrying credentials that represent some of the most elite training and operational experience available in the modern military." The bombshell revelation that Sarah was a SEAL had left everyone in the maintenance bay stunned. But Admiral Harrison wasn't finished. The truth about her elite background was only the beginning of a larger lesson about respect, leadership, and the dangerous consequences of making assumptions about people's capabilities. The maintenance bay remained frozen in stunned silence as the full weight of Admiral Harrison's revelation settled over the assembled crew. Sarah could see the shock rippling through the faces around her, some showing disbelief, others displaying the kind of respect that came from understanding exactly what SEAL training represented, and a few revealing the dawning horror of recognizing their own complicity in months of harassment. Rodriguez stood at the center of it all, his face cycling through expressions of confusion, denial, and growing panic. The confident swagger that had defined his interactions with Sarah for 6 months had completely evaporated, replaced by the trembling posture of someone who realized they'd made a catastrophic mistake. "Sir," Rodriguez said finally, his voice barely above a whisper, "I didn't know. If I had known about her background, I would never have—" "Exactly," Admiral Harrison interrupted, his voice cutting through Rodriguez's stammering explanation. "Like a blade. You would never have treated her that way if you'd known her background. But here's what you need to understand, Petty Officer Rodriguez, that's precisely the problem." The Admiral's words carried the weight of decades of military leadership, each syllable carefully chosen to drive home a point that went far beyond this single incident. Sarah watched as the maintenance crew struggled to process not just the revelation about her background, but the deeper implications of what Admiral Harrison was saying. The respect, courtesy, and professional treatment that you would have shown Petty Officer Chen if you'd known about her. SEAL training should have been given to her regardless of her background, Admiral Harrison continued, his voice rising slightly, to ensure that every person in the maintenance bay could hear him clearly. Every sailor deserved to be treated with dignity and respect based on their service to this country, not based on assumptions about their capabilities or worthiness. Sarah felt a surge of emotion that she hadn't expected. For 6 months, she'd told herself that the harassment was manageable, that it was just part of maintaining her cover, that she could endure it as easily as she'd endured the physical challenges of SEAL training. But hearing Admiral Harrison articulate the principle that every sailor deserved respect, regardless of their background, made her realize how much the constant undermining had actually affected her. Williams, who had been Rodriguez's frequent companion in the harassment, tried to quietly move toward the exit, but Admiral Harrison's sharp gaze caught the movement immediately. "Petty Officer Williams," the Admiral called out, his voice stopping Williams in his tracks, "please join us. I believe you've been part of the leadership team here." Williams approached reluctantly, his face showing the same growing panic that Rodriguez was experiencing. "Sir, I've just been supporting Petty Officer Rodriguez's leadership and following his guidance on team management." "Team management, Admiral," Harrison repeated, his tone making it clear that he wasn't buying Williams's attempt to deflect responsibility. "And what has this team management involved?" Sarah watched Williams struggle with the same dilemma that Rodriguez had faced: how to explain months of harassment and unprofessional behavior to a flag officer who now understood exactly who she was and what she'd accomplished. "Sir, we've been focused on maintaining high standards and ensuring that everyone understands the importance of proving themselves through hard work," Williams said, essentially repeating Rodriguez's earlier deflection. "Admiral." Harrison nodded slowly, as if he'd expected exactly this response. "I see." And during these months of maintaining high standards, did either of you take the time to actually evaluate Petty Officer Chen's performance objectively? The question hung in the air like an accusation. Both Rodriguez and Williams exchanged glances, clearly realizing that they were being forced to confront the gap between their assumptions and reality. "Sir," Rodriguez said hesitantly, "I observed her work and provided feedback based on my assessment of her performance." "Your assessment," Admiral Harrison said, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. "Let me share some actual performance data. That might interest you. Over the past 6 months, Petty Officer Chen has had 0 safety incidents, 0 quality control failures, and has consistently completed her assigned tasks ahead of schedule and under budget." He paused, letting the information sink in before continuing. "Furthermore, she has identified and resolved 3 major system problems that had been ongoing for weeks before her arrival, and she has proposed modifications that have improved efficiency across multiple ship systems." Sarah could see the maintenance crew beginning to process this information, connecting it with their own observations of her work. Several of them were nodding slightly, recognizing the pattern of competence that they'd witnessed but hadn't fully acknowledged. "In contrast," Admiral Harrison continued, "during the same period, your team has had multiple safety incidents, several quality control failures, and has consistently run over budget and behind schedule on routine maintenance tasks." The Admiral's words were hitting Rodriguez and Williams like physical blows. Their faces showed the growing realization that not only had they been harassing an elite warrior, but they'd been doing so while she consistently outperformed them in every measurable way. "Sir," Rodriguez said desperately, "if I had known about her background, I would have approached the situation differently." Admiral Harrison's expression hardened. "That's exactly what I'm trying to help you understand. Petty Officer Rodriguez, the fact that you would have treated her differently if you'd known about her SEAL training reveals that your treatment of her was never about her actual performance or capabilities. It was based on assumptions and prejudices that have no place in the modern Navy." The Admiral turned to address the entire maintenance crew, his voice taking on the tone of someone delivering a lesson that extended far beyond this single incident. "The United States Navy has spent decades learning that excellence comes in many forms. We have moved beyond the outdated thinking that suggests certain people are more or less capable based on their gender, their background, or any other factor unrelated to their actual performance." He paused, scanning the faces around him to ensure that his message was being received. Any leader who fails to recognize the potential of their team members, who makes assumptions based on prejudice rather than performance, is not just failing. They're individual sailors. They're failing the Navy and the country we serve. Sarah felt a profound sense of validation hearing these words. The isolation and frustration of the past 6 months hadn't been her imagination or oversensitivity. It had been a genuine failure of leadership that Admiral Harrison was now addressing directly. "But here's what makes this situation particularly troubling," the Admiral continued, his voice taking on an even more serious tone. "While you've been questioning Petty Officer Chen's competence and suggesting that she doesn't belong in maintenance work, she has been serving with distinction in a role that requires not just technical skills, but the kind of mental toughness and adaptability that few people possess." Admiral Harrison moved closer to Rodriguez, his presence suddenly filling the space between them. "Do you understand what it means to maintain your professionalism and effectiveness while being consistently undermined and disrespected? Do you have any idea what kind of mental strength that requires?" Rodriguez looked around desperately, as if searching for help that wasn't coming. The other members of the maintenance crew were watching with a mixture of fascination and horror, beginning to understand that they were witnessing not just a confrontation, but a lesson in leadership that would stay with them for the rest of their careers. Admiral Harrison's lesson about respect and leadership had been delivered with devastating effectiveness, But now came the moment when principles had to be translated into concrete actions. The reckoning that Rodriguez and Williams had been dreading was about to begin in earnest. "Admiral," Harrison's question hung in the air like a judgment waiting to be rendered. Rodriguez's face had gone completely pale as he realized that there was no answer he could give that would mitigate the scope of his failure. The confident petty officer who had spent months belittling Sarah's competence now looked like a man who understood that his career was about to take a devastating turn. "Sir," Rodriguez said finally, his voice shaking, "I realize now that I may have misjudged the situation. If I had understood Petty Officer Chun's background and capabilities, I would have—" "Stop," Admiral Harrison interrupted, his voice carrying the kind of authority that ended discussions immediately. "You keep saying that you would have acted differently if you'd known about her background. But I want you to think about what you're really saying." The Admiral turned to face the entire maintenance crew, ensuring that everyone present understood that this was about more than just Rodriguez's individual failure. What Petty Officer Rodriguez is telling us is that he reserves respectful, professional treatment for people whose backgrounds he deems worthy of respect. That's not leadership, that's prejudice dressed up as standards. Sarah watched the faces around her, seeing the growing understanding that Admiral Harrison was delivering a lesson that went far beyond her individual situation. Several of the younger sailors were nodding slightly, recognizing principles of leadership that they'd been taught but had never seen demonstrated so clearly. Every sailor who puts on this uniform deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. Admiral Harrison continued, his voice rising to ensure that every person in the maintenance bay could hear him clearly. That respect isn't earned through background or credentials. It's the baseline standard of professional behavior that we expect from every leader in the Navy. Williams, who had been standing slightly behind Rodriguez, tried to distance himself from the situation. "Sir, I want to emphasize that I was following Petty Officer Rodriguez's leadership guidance. I didn't initiate any of the feedback or guidance that was provided to Petty Officer Chun." Admiral Harrison's gaze shifted to Williams, and Sarah could see the same cold fury that had been directed at Rodriguez. "So you're telling me that you witnessed inappropriate treatment of a fellow sailor and chose to participate rather than address it?" Williams's face went through the same progression of expressions that Rodriguez had shown: confusion, denial, and finally dawning horror as he realized that there was no position that would protect him from the consequences of his actions. "Sir, I was supporting team unity and following the leadership structure that had been established," Williams said desperately. "Team unity," Admiral Harrison repeated, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. "You call harassment and unprofessional behavior team unity? You think that undermining a fellow sailor's confidence and competence contributes to unit effectiveness?" The Admiral's questions were methodically destroying every justification that Williams and Rodriguez had constructed for their behavior. Sarah could see other members of the maintenance crew beginning to shift uncomfortably as they recognized their own complicity in the situation. "Let me explain something to both of you," Admiral Harrison said, his voice taking on the tone of someone delivering a lesson that would have lasting consequences. Military leadership isn't about maintaining your own position or protecting your own ego. It's about recognizing and developing the potential of every person under your command. He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. "While you've been focused on maintaining what you thought was appropriate hierarchy, you've been wasting the talents of one of the most highly trained individuals in the Navy. Do you understand what that means for unit effectiveness?" Rodriguez looked around the maintenance bay as if seeing it for the first time, beginning to understand that his leadership failures had affected not just Sarah, but the entire team's performance and morale. "Sir," Rodriguez said quietly, "I think I'm beginning to understand the scope of my mistake." Admiral Harrison nodded grimly. "I hope you are, Petty Officer Rodriguez. Because this isn't just about one incident or one person. This is about fundamental principles of leadership and respect that affect every aspect of military service." The Admiral turned back to Sarah, his expression softening slightly. "Petty Officer Chen, I want you to know that what you've endured over the past 6 months is not representative of Navy standards or values. Your professionalism and dedication in the face of inappropriate treatment reflects the highest traditions of military service." Sarah felt a surge of emotion that she hadn't expected. After months of being told that she was inadequate, that she didn't belong, that she needed to prove herself through basic competence, hearing Admiral Harrison acknowledge her service felt like validation she hadn't realized she desperately needed. "Thank you, sir," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion she was feeling. "I want to emphasize that I've remained focused on completing my assigned mission and maintaining the standards expected of Navy personnel." Admiral Harrison smiled slightly, the first hint of warmth he'd shown since the revelation began. "That's exactly what I would expect from someone with your background and training. But it's also exactly what we should expect from every sailor, regardless of their background." He turned back to Rodriguez and Williams, his expression becoming businesslike. "Now, let's discuss the consequences of this situation. Petty Officer Rodriguez, you will be relieved of your leadership position immediately. A formal investigation will be conducted into your treatment of Petty Officer Chen and your overall leadership practices." Rodriguez's face went completely white as he realized that his military career was about to be derailed by his own prejudices and failures. "Sir, I understand that I've made mistakes, but I hope you'll consider that I've served faithfully for. Faithful service includes treating your fellow sailors with respect and dignity." Admiral Harrison interrupted. "Your treatment of Petty Officer Chen demonstrates a fundamental failure to understand basic principles of military leadership." The Admiral's gaze shifted to Williams. "Petty Officer Williams, you will also be subject to formal investigation for your participation in the harassment of Petty Officer Chen. Your claim that you were following orders doesn't absolve you of responsibility for your own actions." Williams opened his mouth to protest, but Admiral Harrison's expression made it clear that the discussion was over. The consequences were being implemented with the swift efficiency that characterized military justice when senior leadership decided that examples needed to be made. "Furthermore," Admiral Harrison continued, "this entire maintenance section will undergo mandatory training on leadership, respect, and professional conduct. Clearly, there are systemic issues here that need to be addressed." Sarah watched the faces around her, seeing the growing realization that Admiral Harrison's intervention was going to change everything about how this maintenance section operated. The casual harassment and unprofessional behavior that had characterized her experience wasn't going to be tolerated anymore. With Rodriguez and Williams facing the consequences of their actions, Admiral Harrison was ready to implement the positive changes that would transform the maintenance section. The destruction of the old, dysfunctional leadership structure was about to give way to something entirely new. With Sarah at its center, the maintenance bay had transformed from a place of casual harassment into something resembling a courtroom where justice was being administered with military precision. Admiral Harrison's systematic dismantling of Rodriguez's leadership had created a vacuum that needed to be filled, and Sarah could see him calculating the best way to restore both morale and effectiveness to the maintenance section. "Petty Officer Chen," Admiral Harrison said, his voice taking on a more formal tone, "given your demonstrated competence and leadership capabilities, I'm implementing immediate changes to the command structure of this maintenance section." Sarah felt her heart rate increase as she realized that her carefully maintained cover was about to be completely blown. The quiet assignment that had allowed her to recover from her injuries while maintaining her skills was about to become something much more visible and complex. "Sir," she said carefully, "I want to ensure that any changes to my assignment are consistent with my current operational parameters and recovery timeline." Admiral Harrison nodded, showing that he understood the delicate balance between recognizing her capabilities and maintaining the security requirements of her situation. Your recovery and preparation for future operations remain the primary consideration. However, it's clear that your skills and experience are being wasted in your current role." He turned to address the entire maintenance crew, his voice carrying the authority of someone who was about to implement significant changes. Effective immediately, Petty Officer Chen will be assuming supervisory responsibilities for technical operations in this section. Her experience and demonstrated competence make her the logical choice for this position. Sarah could see the shock rippling through the maintenance crew as they processed this development. The woman they'd watched being harassed and dismissed for 6 months was suddenly being elevated to a position of authority over the people who had been treating her as incompetent. Several of the maintenance crew members looked genuinely ashamed as they began to understand the full scope of what had been happening. Martinez, one of the younger sailors who had generally stayed out of the harassment but hadn't spoken up against it, stepped forward with an expression of obvious regret. "Ma'am," he said to Sarah, his voice carrying the kind of respect that had been absent from the maintenance bay for months, "I want to apologize for not speaking up when I saw how you were being treated. I knew your work was excellent, but I didn't have the courage to challenge the leadership structure." Sarah appreciated the apology, but she also recognized the complex dynamics that had prevented Martinez and others from intervening. Military hierarchy created situations where speaking up against established leadership required enormous courage, even when that leadership was clearly wrong. "Thank you, Martinez," she replied, her voice carrying the same quiet authority that had impressed Admiral Harrison. "Moving forward, I want everyone to understand that this maintenance section will operate based on competence, respect, and professional standards. Everyone will be evaluated based on their actual performance, not on assumptions or prejudices." Admiral Harrison watched this exchange with obvious approval, recognizing that Sarah's response demonstrated exactly the kind of leadership principles that had been missing from the maintenance section. Her focus on performance and professionalism rather than revenge or punishment showed the maturity and wisdom that came from her elite training and operational experience. "Petty Officer Chen," Admiral Harrison said, "I want you to know that your new supervisory role comes with my full support and authority. Any challenges to your leadership or attempts to undermine your authority will be dealt with immediately and severely." The Admiral's words carried the weight of flag officer authority, making it clear that anyone who continued to harbor prejudices or resentments would face consequences far more serious than anything Rodriguez and Williams were experiencing. Thompson, one of the more experienced maintenance crew members who had generally stayed neutral during the harassment, approached Sarah with a mixture of respect and curiosity. "Ma'am, if I may ask, what should we know about working under your supervision? Are there specific standards or procedures you want us to follow?" Sarah appreciated Thompson's direct approach and professional attitude. It was exactly the kind of question that demonstrated a willingness to adapt and learn rather than resist change. "The standards are straightforward," she replied. "Excellence in technical work, safety in all operations, respect for every team member, and continuous improvement in our capabilities. I'll be working alongside everyone, not just giving orders from a distance." Her response seemed to resonate with the maintenance crew, several of whom were nodding in recognition of leadership principles they'd been hoping to see implemented. Sarah's approach was clearly different from Rodriguez's hierarchical style, focused on collaboration and shared excellence rather than dominance and control. Admiral Harrison stepped forward to address the entire maintenance section one final time. "I want everyone here to understand that what happened today represents a fundamental shift in how this section will operate. The harassment, disrespect, and unprofessional behavior that has characterized this workplace will not be tolerated under any circumstances." He paused, scanning the faces around him to ensure that his message was being received clearly. "Moreover, I want you to understand that Petty Officer Chen's background and experience represent resources that this Navy values highly. Her assignment to this section wasn't a demotion or a punishment, it was a strategic placement that you failed to recognize and utilize effectively. Sarah felt a surge of validation hearing Admiral Harrison frame her assignment in these terms. For 6 months, she'd been carrying the weight of seeming like she'd been demoted or sidelined, even though she understood the operational reasons for her placement. Moving forward, Admiral Harrison continued, this maintenance section will serve as a model for how technical excellence, professional respect, and effective leadership can create an environment where everyone can perform at their highest level. The Admiral's words were clearly intended to transform the maintenance section from a place of dysfunction into something that could serve as an example for the rest of the Navy. Sarah recognized the opportunity and the responsibility that came with this transformation. Sir, she said, addressing Admiral Harrison directly, I want to assure you that this maintenance section will exceed all performance standards and serve as a demonstration of what's possible when sailors are allowed to contribute their full capabilities. Admiral Harrison smiled, the first genuine expression of warmth he'd shown since the confrontation began. I have complete confidence in your ability to make that happen, Petty Officer Chen. Your record of excellence speaks for itself. As the Admiral prepared to leave the maintenance bay, Sarah realized that this moment represented more than just the end of 6 months of harassment. It was the beginning of an opportunity to demonstrate leadership principles and professional excellence that could influence how the Navy approached similar situations in the future. That the immediate aftermath of Admiral Harrison's intervention was just the beginning of a transformation that would extend far beyond the maintenance bay. As Sarah stepped into her new leadership role, she faced the challenge of building something positive from the wreckage of the old system. The days following Admiral Harrison's intervention brought a transformation to the maintenance bay that went far beyond simple personnel changes. Sarah found herself navigating the complex transition from harassment target to section leader, while simultaneously managing the emotional and professional aftermath of having her true background revealed. Rodriguez and Williams had been transferred, pending the completion of their formal investigations, leaving behind a maintenance crew that was struggling to understand how they'd been so wrong about someone they'd worked alongside for 6 months. The atmosphere in the bay had shifted from casual hostility to something approaching reverence, which presented its own challenges for Sarah's leadership style. Ma'am, Martinez said during the first morning briefing under Sarah's supervision, I've been thinking about some of the maintenance procedures we've been using, and I wonder if there might be more efficient approaches we could consider. Sarah appreciated Martinez's initiative, but she also recognized that he was overcompensating for his previous silence during the harassment. The dynamic in the maintenance bay had swung from one extreme to another, and she needed to find a balance that would allow everyone to work effectively. That's exactly the kind of thinking I want to encourage, she replied, her voice carrying the calm authority that had impressed Admiral Harrison. But I also want everyone to understand that you don't need to treat me differently than you would any other supervisor. I'm here to work alongside you, not to be placed on a pedestal. Thompson, who had emerged as one of the more thoughtful members of the maintenance crew, nodded in understanding. Ma'am, I think what we're all struggling with is how to process the fact that we completely misjudged the situation. It's making us second-guess everything we thought we knew about leadership and competence. Sarah recognized the wisdom in Thompson's observation. The revelation of her SEAL background had forced everyone in the maintenance bay to confront their own assumptions and prejudices, creating a period of uncertainty that needed to be managed carefully. That's actually a healthy response, she sighed, addressing the entire maintenance crew. The fact that you're questioning your assumptions means you're learning and growing. That's exactly what we want in a high-performing team. Over the following weeks, Sarah implemented changes that went far beyond simple procedural modifications. She restructured the maintenance bay's operations to focus on collaborative problem-solving rather than hierarchical task assignment. She created opportunities for every team member to contribute their ideas and expertise, regardless of their rank or seniority. The results were immediate and dramatic. Maintenance tasks that had routinely run over schedule and budget were completed efficiently and effectively. System problems that had persisted for months were resolved through innovative approaches that emerged from the collaborative environment Sarah had created. More importantly, the maintenance crew began to demonstrate the kind of pride and professionalism that had been missing during Rodriguez's leadership. They weren't just following orders, they were actively contributing to solutions and taking ownership of their work in ways that impressed the ship's senior leadership. Admiral Harrison returned to the maintenance bay 3 weeks after his initial intervention, conducting what was officially described as a routine follow-up inspection, but which everyone understood was an evaluation of the changes he'd implemented. "Petty Officer Chen," he said after observing the maintenance crew's operations for several hours, "I'm impressed by what you've accomplished here. The improvement in both efficiency and morale is exactly what I hope to see." Sarah felt a surge of pride that was different from the satisfaction she'd experienced during her special operations missions. This was about building something positive and lasting, about creating an environment where people could grow and contribute their best work. "Thank you, sir," she replied. "I think the key has been helping everyone understand that their contributions are valued and that we're all working toward the same goals." Admiral Harrison nodded approvingly. "That's exactly the kind of leadership philosophy that the Navy needs more of. You've demonstrated that respect and professional excellence aren't just ideals. They're practical tools that improve performance and effectiveness." As the Admiral prepared to leave, he pulled Sarah aside for a private conversation. "I want you to know that your success here hasn't gone unnoticed at higher levels. Your ability to transform a dysfunctional unit into a high-performing team demonstrates exactly the kind of leadership skills that the Navy values." Sarah felt a mixture of pride and anticipation as she realized that Admiral Harrison was suggesting her assignment might be leading to new opportunities. "Sir, I want to ensure that whatever comes next is consistent with my recovery timeline and operational readiness." "Of course," Admiral Harrison replied. "But I also want you to understand that your skills and experience are too valuable to waste. The Navy needs leaders who can bridge the gap between technical excellence and human development." In the months that followed, Sarah's maintenance section became a model for other units throughout the fleet. Officers and senior enlisted personnel visited to observe the collaborative leadership style and professional atmosphere that had replaced the toxic environment of Rodriguez's tenure. Sarah found herself speaking at leadership conferences, training sessions, sharing the lessons she'd learned about recognizing and developing talent regardless of background or assumptions. Her story became a case study in military leadership schools, demonstrating how prejudice and harassment could waste valuable resources and how effective leadership could transform unit performance. But perhaps most importantly, Sarah discovered that her experience in the maintenance bay had prepared her for her next assignment in ways that traditional training couldn't have provided. She had learned to lead people who initially doubted her capabilities, to build trust through competence and professionalism, and to create environments where everyone could contribute their best work. The hidden SEAL Trident that had once been a source of isolation and frustration became a symbol of the unexpected ways that excellence could emerge and transform entire organizations. Sarah's story reminded everyone who heard it that assumptions about competence and capability were often wrong, and that the most valuable contributions sometimes came from the most unexpected sources. As she prepared for her next assignment, Sarah reflected on the lesson that Admiral Harrison had taught through his intervention, that respect and professional treatment weren't privileges to be earned through background or credentials, but basic rights that belonged to every person who chose to serve their country. It was a lesson that would influence her leadership style for the rest of her career, and one that would continue to transform the units and organizations she led. In the years to come, The success of Sarah's transformation in the maintenance bay had not gone unnoticed by senior leadership, and the implications of what she had accomplished were beginning to ripple through the Navy in ways that surprised everyone involved. What had started as a single incident of harassment had evolved into a case study in organizational transformation. 6 months after Admiral Harrison's intervention, the transformation of Sarah's maintenance section had become legendary throughout Naval Station Norfolk. What had started as a confrontation over workplace harassment had evolved into something much more significant, a demonstration of how effective leadership could unlock potential that had been hidden by prejudice and poor management. Sarah stood in the maintenance bay early one morning, reviewing the performance metrics that had become a source of pride for her entire team. Their section had achieved the highest efficiency ratings in the fleet, reduced safety incidents to 0, and developed innovative solutions that were being adopted across multiple ship classes. More importantly, they had created an environment where every sailor felt valued and empowered to contribute their best work. "Ma'am," Thompson called out as he approached with the morning's work assignments, "we've got another delegation coming in today. This time it's from the Pacific Fleet. They want to observe our collaborative maintenance protocols." Sarah smiled, recognizing the irony in the situation. The maintenance section that had once been characterized by harassment and dysfunction was now being studied as a model of excellence. Officers and senior enlisted personnel from across the Navy were visiting to learn from the transformation she'd implemented. "Make sure everyone understands that these visits aren't about showing off," she replied, her voice carrying the same calm authority that had impressed Admiral Harrison months earlier. "They're about sharing knowledge and helping other units improve their own performance." Martinez, who had evolved from a silent observer of harassment to one of Sarah's most trusted team leaders, approached with an expression of obvious pride. "Ma'am, I wanted to let you know that the hydraulic system modifications we developed last month have been approved for fleet-wide implementation. The engineering command says they could improve efficiency by 15% across all ship classes." Sarah felt a surge of satisfaction that was different from the adrenaline rush of her special operations missions. This was about building something lasting, about creating innovations that would benefit thousands of sailors for years to come. Technical skills she'd developed during her SEAL training were being applied to solve problems that affected the entire Navy. "That's excellent news," she said, her pride evident in her voice. "Make sure everyone on the team understands that their contributions made this possible. Innovation like this comes from collaborative effort, not individual genius." The morning progressed with the familiar rhythm of efficient maintenance operations. Sarah moved through the bay, observing work, providing guidance, and ensuring that the high standards they'd established were being maintained. But she was also aware that her time in this assignment was beginning to draw to a close. Admiral Harrison had been visiting more frequently, conducting what were officially described as routine inspections, but which Sarah recognized as evaluations of her readiness for more challenging assignments. Her recovery from her combat injuries was complete. Her leadership skills had been proven in a civilian-like environment, and her technical expertise had been enhanced by months of intensive maintenance work. Petty Officer Chen, Admiral Harrison's voice carried across the maintenance bay as he arrived for his latest visit. "I'd like to speak with you privately when you have a moment." Sarah finished her current task and followed the Admiral to the same corner of the maintenance bay, where he'd first revealed his recognition of her SEAL background. The space had become symbolic of transformation, the place where her hidden identity had been exposed and her true capabilities had finally been acknowledged. "Sir," she said, coming to attention with the same precision that had characterized her military bearing throughout her career. "Admiral." Harrison's expression was serious, but not unkind. "Petty Officer Chen, I want to discuss your next assignment. Your performance here has been exceptional, and it's time to consider how your skills and experience can best serve the Navy's current needs." Sarah felt a mixture of anticipation and regret. She'd grown attached to the maintenance section and the people she'd been leading. The transformation from harassment target to respected supervisor had been personally meaningful in ways that her special operations missions, despite their importance, hadn't quite achieved. "I'm ready for whatever assignment the Navy believes would best utilize my capabilities," she replied, though her voice carried a note of sadness at the prospect of leaving. Admiral Harrison seemed to understand her mixed emotions. "I want you to know that your work here has had an impact that extends far beyond this single maintenance section. The leadership principles you've demonstrated, the collaborative approach you've implemented, and the results you've achieved are being studied and adopted throughout the fleet." He paused, his expression becoming more serious. "But I also want you to understand that your special operations background and the skills you've developed during this assignment have created opportunities that few people in the Navy will ever have." Sarah felt her heart rate increase as she realized that Admiral Harrison was about to offer her something significant. Her months of recovery and leadership development had been preparing her for this moment, though she hadn't fully understood what was coming. "The Navy is developing a new program that combines special operations capabilities with technical expertise and leadership development," Admiral Harrison continued. "It's designed to create leaders who can operate effectively in both combat and civilian environments, who can bridge the gap between elite military training and the kind of collaborative leadership that you've demonstrated here." Sarah processed this information, understanding that Admiral Harrison was describing a role that would utilize all of her capabilities, her SEAL training, her technical skills, and the leadership experience she'd gained during her time in the maintenance section. This program would involve rotating assignments between special operations missions and leadership roles in technical organizations, the Admiral explained. "The goal is to develop officers who can bring military precision and excellence to civilian-like environments, while also bringing collaborative leadership skills to special operations contexts." Sarah realized that Admiral Harrison was offering her the opportunity to become part of something groundbreaking, a new approach to military leadership that recognized the value of diverse experiences and cross-functional capabilities. "Sir," she said carefully, "this sounds like an opportunity that would allow me to continue contributing to both special operations and organizational development." Admiral Harrison nodded approvingly. "Exactly. Your experience here has demonstrated that elite military training and collaborative leadership aren't contradictory, they're complementary. The Navy needs more leaders who understand both worlds." As Sarah considered the implications of this opportunity, she realized that her months of enduring harassment and then transforming her maintenance section had been preparing her for something much larger. The skills she'd developed, the lessons she'd learned, and the relationships she'd built were all part of a foundation that would support her in roles she couldn't have imagined when she first arrived at the maintenance bay. "There's one more thing I want you to understand," Admiral Harrison said, his voice taking on a more personal tone. "Your story, the way you handled the harassment, the professionalism you maintained, and the transformation you achieved, become an inspiration for sailors throughout the fleet. You've shown that excellence can emerge from the most challenging circumstances." Sarah felt a surge of emotion as she realized that her experience had meaning beyond her individual career. The months of being underestimated and dismissed had led to an opportunity to demonstrate principles of leadership and resilience that could influence how the Navy approached similar situations in the future. "Sir," she said, her voice steady, despite the emotions she was feeling, "I'm honored by this opportunity and ready to take on whatever challenges come with it." Admiral Harrison smiled, the expression transforming his usually serious demeanor. "I knew you would be. Your next assignment will begin in 3 months, which gives you time to transition your current responsibilities and prepare for the next phase of your career." As the Admiral prepared to leave, Sarah realized that her hidden SEAL Trident was about to become visible again. but in a completely different context. Instead of being a source of isolation and secrecy, it would become a symbol of the diverse capabilities that the Navy was learning to value and develop. As Sarah's assignment in the maintenance section drew to a close, the full scope of what had been accomplished became clear. The transformation had extended far beyond improved performance metrics. It had created a new model for military leadership that was being studied and implemented throughout the Navy. The final weeks of Sarah's assignment in the maintenance section were marked by a bittersweet combination of pride in what had been accomplished and sadness at leaving the team she'd worked so hard to develop. The maintenance bay had become more than just a workplace. It had evolved into a laboratory for leadership principles that were being studied and implemented throughout the Navy. Sarah stood before her assembled team for what would be her final morning briefing as their supervisor. The faces looking back at her showed a mixture of respect, gratitude, and genuine affection that had replaced the hostility and dismissal she'd encountered when she first arrived. Thompson, Martinez, and the other sailors who had witnessed her transformation from harassment target to respected leader understood that they had been part of something significant. "I want everyone to understand that what we've accomplished here belongs to all of you," Sarah said, her voice carrying the same calm authority that had become her trademark. "The innovations we've developed, the standards we've established, and the culture we've created, these are the result of everyone's commitment to excellence and mutual respect." Martinez, who had become one of her most trusted team leaders, stepped forward with an expression of obvious emotion. "Ma'am, I think I speak for everyone when I say that working under your leadership has changed how we think about what's possible in the military. You've shown us that respect and high performance aren't just compatible, they're essential to each other." Sarah felt a surge of pride that was different from any recognition she'd received during her special operations missions. This was about building something lasting, about creating an environment where people could grow and contribute their best work over time. The technical achievements were impressive, but the human development was what made the assignment truly meaningful. "That's exactly what I hoped you would learn," she replied, her voice carrying genuine warmth. "The military at its best isn't about dominance or hierarchy. It's about bringing out the best in everyone and working together toward common goals." Thompson approached with a folder containing documentation of all the innovations and improvements the maintenance section had developed during Sarah's tenure. "Ma'am, we've compiled everything we've learned and implemented so that it can be easily shared with other units. We want to make sure that what we've built here continues to benefit the Navy even after you've moved on." Sarah accepted the folder with genuine appreciation, understanding that Thompson and the others were ensuring that their work would have lasting impact. The collaborative approach they'd developed, the innovative solutions they'd created, and the professional standards they'd established would continue to influence how maintenance operations were conducted throughout the fleet. "This is exactly the kind of forward thinking that makes me confident about the future of this section," she said, her pride evident in her voice. "You've learned to take ownership not just of your individual tasks, but of the entire unit's success and growth." Admiral Harrison arrived for Sarah's final day with an entourage that included several senior officers who had come to observe the maintenance section's operations one last time. The bay had become a mandatory stop for leadership development programs, with officers from across the Navy visiting to understand how effective leadership could transform organizational culture. "Petty Officer Chen," Admiral Harrison said as he approached, "I want to congratulate you on what you've accomplished. Here, this maintenance section has become a model for the entire fleet, and your leadership has been instrumental in that transformation." Sarah felt a complex mixture of emotions as she prepared to leave the environment where she'd learned so much about leadership and human development. The maintenance bay had taught her lessons that her special operations training, despite its intensity and importance, hadn't been able to provide. "Sir," she replied, I want to emphasize that this transformation was only possible because of the commitment and capabilities of the entire team. They were ready to excel, they just needed leadership that recognized and developed their potential. Admiral Harrison nodded approvingly, recognizing that Sarah's response demonstrated the kind of humility and team-focused thinking that characterized effective leaders. That's exactly the kind of perspective that makes you ready for your next challenges. As the day progressed, Sarah found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her from harassment target to respected leader. The months of being underestimated and dismissed had been frustrating and demoralizing, but they had also taught her lessons about resilience, patience, and the importance of maintaining professional standards even in challenging circumstances. Hidden SEAL Trident, that had once been a source of isolation and secrecy, had become a symbol of the unexpected ways that excellence could emerge and transform entire organizations. Sarah's story had become part of Navy leadership training, demonstrating how prejudice and harassment could waste valuable resources and how effective leadership could unlock potential that had been hidden by assumptions and poor management. "Ma'am," Martinez said as the day drew to a close, "I want you to know that what you've taught us about leadership and respect will stay with us throughout our careers. You've shown us that being tough and being fair aren't contradictory. They're both essential to effective leadership." Sarah felt a surge of satisfaction, knowing that the lessons she'd learned and demonstrated would continue to influence how these sailors approached their own leadership opportunities. The principles of collaboration, mutual respect, and excellence that they developed together would spread throughout the Navy as they advanced in their careers. "That's exactly what I hoped you would take away from this experience," she said, her voice carrying genuine warmth. "Leadership isn't about proving your own superiority. It's about helping everyone around you achieve their potential." As Sarah prepared to leave the maintenance bay for the last time, she realized that her experience had prepared her for her next assignment in ways that traditional training couldn't have provided. She had learned to lead people who initially doubted her capabilities, to build trust through competence and professionalism, and to create environments where everyone could contribute their best work. The transformation of the maintenance section had become more than just a professional achievement. It had become a demonstration of principles that could influence how the Navy approached leadership development, organizational culture, and human potential. Sarah's story would continue to inspire and educate sailors for years to come, reminding them that assumptions about competence and capability were often wrong, and that the most valuable contributions sometimes came from the most unexpected sources. The principles and methods that Sarah had developed during her time in the maintenance section had grown into something much larger than anyone had initially imagined. Her story had become a catalyst for Navy-wide changes in how leadership, respect, and human potential were understood and developed. 2 years after Sarah's departure from the maintenance section, the impact of her leadership continued to ripple through the Navy in ways that surprised even Admiral Harrison. The principles she had demonstrated, the innovations she had developed, and the transformation she had achieved had become part of a broader movement toward more collaborative and effective military leadership. Sarah's current assignment took her to Navy installations around the world, where she worked with units that were struggling with leadership challenges, organizational dysfunction, or cultural problems that were affecting performance. Her unique combination of special operations expertise, technical knowledge, and proven leadership capabilities made her an ideal troubleshooter for situations that required both military precision and human understanding. Standing in a maintenance facility in Pearl Harbor, Sarah watched a team of sailors work through a complex repair procedure with the kind of collaborative efficiency that had become her trademark. This unit had been struggling with the same kinds of problems that had characterized her original assignment: harassment, low morale, and poor performance that stemmed from leadership failures rather than lack of capability. "Ma'am," Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez different Rodriguez from the one who had harassed her, approached with a progress report. The team has completed the engine overhaul 3 days ahead of schedule and under budget. More importantly, they've developed a modification that could improve efficiency across the entire Pacific Fleet. Sarah smiled, recognizing the pattern that had become familiar during her various assignments. When sailors were treated with respect and given opportunities to contribute their ideas, they consistently exceeded expectations and developed innovations that benefited the entire Navy. "That's excellent news," she replied, her voice carrying the same calm authority that had impressed Admiral Harrison years earlier. "Make sure everyone understands that their contributions are valued and that this success belongs to the entire team." The transformation of this Pearl Harbor unit had taken only 6 months, compared to the longer process at her original assignment. Sarah had learned to identify and address the root causes of organizational dysfunction more quickly, and her reputation had made it easier to gain the trust and cooperation of both senior leadership and junior personnel. Admiral Harrison, who had continued to monitor Sarah's career development, had visited the previous month to observe her methods and evaluate her continued growth. The program he had designed around her capabilities had proven successful beyond his initial expectations, creating a new model for military leadership that was being studied and adopted throughout the defense establishment. "Petty Officer Chen," Admiral Harrison had said during his visit, "your work here and at other installations has validated an important principle, that military excellence and human development aren't just compatible, they're essential to each other." Sarah had felt a deep sense of satisfaction hearing Admiral Harrison's assessment. The journey from harassment target to respected leader had taught her lessons that went far beyond military applications. She had learned that effective leadership required not just technical competence and authority, but also the ability to recognize and develop potential in others. The maintenance section she had, originally transformed at Naval Station Norfolk, had continued to excel under the leadership of Thompson, who had been promoted and trained in the collaborative methods Sarah had developed. The innovations they had created were now standard throughout the fleet, and the leadership principles they had demonstrated were being taught in military academies around the world. Martinez, who had become one of Sarah's most successful protégés, had been assigned to his own leadership role at a different installation. His reports indicated that he was successfully applying the lessons he had learned, creating environments where respect and high performance reinforced each other. "Ma'am," Martinez had written in his most recent communication, "I want you to know that the principles you taught us about leadership and respect are making a difference everywhere I go. The sailors under my supervision are achieving things they never thought possible, and they're doing it through collaboration rather than competition." Sarah kept these reports in a special file, understanding that they represented the true measure of her success. The technical achievements were impressive, but the human development was what made her work truly meaningful. Every sailor who learned to lead with respect and collaboration would influence countless others throughout their careers. As Sarah prepared to move on to her next assignment, she reflected on the journey that had brought her from a hidden SEAL Trident to recognized leadership expertise. The months of harassment and dismissal had been challenging, but they had also taught her lessons about resilience, patience, and the importance of maintaining professional standards even in the face of adversity. The program Admiral Harrison had created around her capabilities had evolved into something larger than either of them had initially envisioned. The Navy was developing a new generation of leaders who understood that military precision and human development were complementary rather than contradictory, that innovation emerged from collaboration rather than competition, and that respect was not a luxury but a necessity for effective organizations. Sarah's story had become part of Navy leadership training, not just as an example of overcoming harassment, but as a demonstration of how effective leadership could transform entire organizations. Her experience reminded everyone who heard it that assumptions about competence and capability were often wrong, and that the most valuable contributions sometimes came from the most unexpected sources. As she prepared to board the flight that would take her to her next assignment, Sarah touched the SEAL Trident that now rested openly on her uniform. It was no longer hidden beneath a maintenance badge, but displayed as a symbol of the diverse capabilities that modern military leadership required. The Golden Eagle, Anchor, Pistol, and Neptune's Trident represented not just her elite training, but her commitment to excellence in all its forms. The journey from harassment target to respected leader had taught Sarah that true strength came not from dominance or intimidation, but from the ability to bring out the best in others. Her hidden SEAL Trident had become a visible symbol of the unexpected ways that excellence could emerge and transform entire organizations, reminding everyone that the most valuable contributions often came from the most unexpected sources. Her legacy would continue to influence the Navy for generations to come, as the sailors she had led and the principles she had demonstrated spread throughout the fleet. The maintenance badge that had once been used to dismiss and underestimate her had become a symbol of the technical excellence and collaborative leadership that represented the future of military service. Sarah Chen's story would be told and retold in leadership training programs, reminding future generations of military leaders that respect, competence, and collaboration were not just ideals to aspire to, but practical tools that could transform organizations and unlock human potential in ways that traditional approaches never could. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.